It's a pleasure to speak on education to the Baku Forum and to do so in my capacity as UN Envoy on Global Education. And I want to start by thanking NGIC for their leadership on all issues relevant to global cooperation. And this has been especially important in recent times. The last 2 years have been dominated by a health crisis that has caused an economic crisis that in many countries is now causing a fiscal and debt crisis. But in these short remarks, I venture to argue that the global education crisis we now face is as profound as the global health and economic crisis that we've been living through. And the break from traditional policies that we urgently need is perhaps far more radical as we build back better than anything previously contemplated. Education, you know, is the fourth of the Sustainable Development Goals, but in many ways it's the most important, the goal of goals. Education is the key to unlocking every other door to opportunity, gender equality, employment opportunity, improved health, and education is essential if the actions that individuals need to take to ensure a sustainable environment and to develop cross-cultural understandings about the need for coexistence. So the underfunding of education needs to be addressed if we are to achieve any of the important goals. John Kennedy once remarked that the Chinese word for crisis was also the Chinese word for opportunity. And I want us as present and past policymakers to realize the chances now available to us to build a better education system and thus a better future for all our children and young people. So what are the facts? In 2020, economies came to a standstill, but educational progress has not just stalled, but gone into reverse. The term lost generation is widely used when displaced young people bear the brunt of civil wars and conflicts, as is the case in Syria, Yemen, Myanmar, Somalia, Ethiopia, and now Afghanistan. But today the term lost generation has a worldwide resonance, as a total of 1.6 billion children in 188 countries who were deprived of months of schooling now struggle to catch up. In fact, millions have already been lost to education, with an estimated 10 million more child brides, 9 million more underage laborers, and millions more rootless youth now on the streets rather than in the classrooms of the developing world's sprawling megacities. BC, before COVID-19, 258 million school-aged children were not enjoying education. Now the figure is closer to 300 million. BC, before COVID, the average time a young person was at school was not 11 years, 5 to 16 in most countries, but in the poorer countries, just 7.9 years. Now it is less, 6.9 years, a falling level of school attendance that will, it is estimated, cost the world 16 trillion in lost lifetime earnings. BC, before COVID, more than half, 53% or 382 million of the developing world's 10-year-old children could not read or even understand a simple text. Now what is called the learning poverty rate exceeds 60% at 450 more million children. And some people now say it will be 70%. And in the poorest countries, of course, it is more than 90%. Worsening poverty presents additional barriers to educational opportunity. And according to UNICEF, nearly 370 million children in 150 countries have missed out on daily school meals. And after 1.5 million children have lost a parent or their carer to COVID, depression and mental illness rates have doubled amongst children. Simply put, children have not been learning. And despite the online initiatives that almost every country have lost, they have fallen behind. Children in Africa, Asia, and Latin America have lost on average 50 school weeks. Only 1 in 6 grade 3 students, according to a recent survey in India, can now perform simple subtraction, down from 1 in 4 in 2018. Students in Sao Paulo, Brazil, learned just a quarter of what they would have learned in face-to-face classes. In Ethiopia, where children only learn 30 to 40% as much maths as in an average year, the gaps between the performance of the wealthier urban and poorer rural students have massively widened. 14 countries have experienced around a 20% decrease in higher educational enrollment as well. And at a time when we need to do more education, less is being given in money. With a 2 billion cut in education aid by 2022 and a 1 trillion cut in domestic education budgets. And so if building back better is to happen quickly or at all, we need to think outside the box. In speeches, government ministers have always talked of education as an investment. But in practice, because 70% and more of the costs of teachers' salaries, finance ministers have treated it as normal consumption. with the result that under most fiscal regimes, all current expenditure on education is expected to be covered by taxation. And when the taxes don't come in, education is cut. But we should learn from new thinking about the environment. In the next few years, the fiscally conservative German government is considering creating a special purpose vehicle to invest 500 billion euros in environmental infrastructure and exempt such expenditure from their controversial debt brake. I expect that investment in a sustainable environment in future years will also fall out the previously inflexible constraints of the European Growth and Stability Pact. The original infrastructure plans of the Biden administration, now going through Congress, have treated investment in human capital expenditure in an identical way to investment in physical capital. And so education now needs to be considered, not only as an investment, but until we see a turnaround in school results, it has to be treated like climate expenditure, a separate category of investment outside some of the traditional fiscal rules. And this means a new approach to debt-burdened countries that will come under IMF and World Bank programs. Already half of the 74 countries applying for the loans and grants have been found to be in, quote, external debt distress or at high risk of it. These countries will now face cuts in the social programs that will inevitably mean school closures, the sacking of teachers, and an end to the catch-up initiatives if we do not act. Education should again here be exempted from any austerity plans to allow for rising expenditure on schools throughout the developing world, as long, of course, as it can be shown to be a prudent investment in the future. In time, we need to create new vehicles for education, including IFID, the innovative finance facility that I hope you will support, whose leveraging up of $1 billion of guarantees into $5 billion of additional educational resources is a far more cost-effective way of investing in education than existing schemes. With an initial investment of, say, $2 billion, which would create $10 billion of resources for education, the faculty could transform the lives of tens of millions of young people over the next 10 years, people who would otherwise be left behind. Such an initiative, and initiatives like this, can offer young people hope where today it is fading. There are 12 million child refugees, probably 40 million displaced children, and perhaps 150 million children in conflict zones where they're simply not safe. These children need our support. You know, hope dies when a refugee boat capsizes, or a food convoy can't reach hungry people, or a hospital has no doctors to treat patients. But hope also dies when a young person cannot prepare for the future and is unable even to dream of a different life ahead. But hope can come alive when young people can bridge the gap between who they are and what they have it in themselves to become through study at school. That is why it is so urgent that we come to the aid of this lost generation now. No economic or health recovery can ever be complete or sustained without the recovery I'm calling for in education.